April 12, 1944. 27,000 at FT above the green-brown quilt of Normandy, France. The wind bites through their rayon flight suits. The cold is sharp enough to taste. Captain Robert "Bob" Hargreaves, 60 inches of flannel at the throat and a visor rim frosting with breath. Thumbs the throttles of a B-17G that smells of castor oil, hot coffee gone stale, and the metallic tang of sweat. The bomber shudders as the four right cyclone radials spool. A steady mechanical growl beneath the muttered prayers of the crew. Below them, the channel is a gunmetal mirror. Ahead, the city of Caen sits like a bruise. Formation tight, the navigator calls from behind maps taped to the bulkhead. In the waist, Sergeant Louis Calder patches a glove around his hand and peers through a slit, eyes bright behind goggles. In the tail, Sergeant Jimmy Armento keeps the twin 50s sweeping the sky, patiently scanning for the dark, glinting blips that meant a Messerschmitt or a Focke-Wulf. They are not alone. Off to starboard, like rivets in a 1,000-mile seam. The sky is full of aluminum, B-17s and B-24s with their fluted bellies and blunt noses, P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs threading between them like meticulous workers on a hurried shift change. The planes come in waves, squadrons stacked 2 by 2, then whole wings folding into columns, a living, moving assembly line in the clouds. The sound is not chaotic. It is an industrial chorus. Synchronized engines, clipped commands over the intercom, the muffled clank when a landing gear compartment latches on one bomber, as if the aircraft themselves were machinery on a vast, airborne production floor. Look at that, the tail gunner says, almost to himself. He is not referring to flak bursts or the dark shapes of German fighters slicing towards them, but to the sight of more and more aircraft joining the stream, from where they fly, overhead and below and stretching away to the horizon. The scale reads like a manufacturing miracle, an unending parade of fresh skins and polished propellers that never seems to thin. The plane rocks as if in answer to another's cough. The intercom hisses with the navigator's voice. Target, northwest of Caen, flak heavy on approach. The bomber dips and the crew braces. Outside, the sun strips away any softness from the silver surfaces. Reflections leap like shards of light. A young co-pilot with eyes too old for his face. Second Lieutenant Thomas Keegan. Just 20 scans the formation, and for a heartbeat his expression is not fear but hungry astonishment, as if he is seeing for the first time the sheer arithmetic of Allied air power made visible. We are with them in the cold, hearing the mechanical music, feeling the pressure of 1,000 aircraft like a hand at the back of the neck. The mission is a mission, but the mission also becomes a conversation with the sky. How many they have, how often they will come, how every factory in America seems to be sending a new line of metal up to fight. The thought is not stated aloud yet. It needs no voice. It is inscribed in the rhythm of the formation, in the steadiness of replacements sliding into gaps, in the way the pilots wave each other on with the small, professional signs of fellow craftsmen. Later that night, after flak and the smell of cordite scrape from the plane, and the crew unbuttons and waits for the legs of their trousers to warm, a different kind of factory will be on the minds of prisoners and interrogators hundreds of miles away. In a dank barn pressed into service as a temporary POW holding, a tall, thin Oberstleutnant, Lieutenant Colonel Hans Dietrich, will sit in a folding chair while Allied officers, slick from relative safety, wheel in a projector and lower the lamp. Dietrich's uniform is neat despite the smoke on his breath. His hands are steady. When the reels begin to roll, the barn fills with the staccato beat of rivet guns, the click-clack of jigs, and the unending motion of conveyor belts. The footage is not combat. It is the factory floor. Men bent over wing ribs, women guiding fuselages into cradles, tractors pulling completed airframes like tamed stars towards the docks. Dietrich will lean forward as if to catch a whisper. He will not be the only German officer who finds himself momentarily bereft of words. The images, shot by reconnaissance and smuggled into intelligence reports, are not propaganda in the crude sense. They are evidence. There is a dignity and an almost obscene efficiency to the movement. The camera lingers on a line where P-51s roll out a wing at a consistent, dozen-per-day rhythm, then cuts to a mass of B-24s waiting for their final checks. A ticker caption flits across a corner of the film showing production numbers, and those numbers read like thunder. Hundreds of fighters, scores of 4-engine bombers all in a single month. Back in the barn, the projector lamp hums and the smell of hot wax and film stock mingles with the damp of the hay-strewn floor. Dietrich's jaw works. Around him, younger Kapitän and Hauptmanns exchange looks that are not of bravado but of measured private panic. The war they had believed in, the calculus of skill and material they had argued over in staff rooms, suddenly looks toppled by something impersonal and inexorable: the American capacity to produce. The evidence on the screen has no feelings, only numbers and repetition, and in the faces of these men, as much as in the faces of the bomber crew hours earlier, there is a dawning comprehension that the sky they contested is being reforged every day in factories far from the front. Outside, a wind pulls at the barn's loose boards and the moon cuts a white line across the field. Inside, the projector clicks on, an endless metronome. The men watch metal being multiplied. They are learning that war is, at its most brutal, a ledger kept in steel and manpower, and that the ledger is being filled at a speed that shocks the assumptions German officers had carried into the field book. Detroit, Michigan, February 1942. The air inside the Willow Run bomber plant is heavy with the scent of hot oil, solder, and ambition. Fluorescent lights hum overhead, reflecting off endless rows of aluminum sheets stacked like mirrors of the future. Men in denim overalls and women in polka-dot kerchiefs move with measured precision along the line. The ground shakes faintly as hydraulic lifts raise half-built fuselages, their bare frames gleaming under the lights like the ribs of sleeping giants. Henry Ford's men had promised the government a miracle: one complete B-24 Liberator bomber every hour. No one, not even the most optimistic engineers, had truly believed it. Yet here, less than a year after Pearl Harbor, the miracle is underway. Rivet guns to line 5. Keep that nose section rolling. The foreman's voice cuts through the mechanical thunder. Sparks fly from the welding arcs. Overhead cranes move with deliberate grace, ferrying wings toward waiting skeletons of fuselage. Beneath them, 1,000 boots march in rhythm, a human heartbeat feeding a mechanical organism. At the far end of the plant, a woman known only to her co-workers as Rosie sets her jaw, leans into the rivet gun, and seals the final panel on a tail section. The machine's rattle merges with the chorus of others around her until it becomes something more: a national drumbeat. Every 10 minutes, another section locks into place. Every hour, another aircraft rolls toward the sunlight beyond the assembly doors. By spring, Willow Run will sprawl over 67 acres under one roof, the largest single manufacturing space in the world. But it's not just size that stuns the visiting generals. It's rhythm. There is no hesitation. Trucks from Chicago bring engine blocks by dawn. Trains from Pennsylvania deliver propellers by dusk. The line never sleeps, not for Christmas, not for blackouts, not for grief. In Washington, the War Production Board calls it the arsenal of democracy, a phrase coined by Roosevelt, but made real by millions of hands. Factories that once built automobiles, washing machines, and refrigerators now assemble warplanes, tanks, and rifles. Every shift change becomes a relay between civilians who have transformed into soldiers of industry. A journalist visiting from Life magazine walks the floor and jots in his notebook, "This is not a factory. This is America in motion." He isn't exaggerating. At peak production, the United States will outbuild Germany, Italy, and Japan combined. Every minute somewhere in the nation, another aircraft engine is tested. Every day more aluminum is forged for the war effort than the Axis can manage in a month. On the West Coast, the Boeing plant in Seattle hums with equal ferocity. Inside Hangar 2, the new B-17 flying fortresses are being assembled in rows that stretch beyond the eye's reach. A young supervisor named Harold Burnham wipes the oil from his palms and watches as the last fuselage rivets are hammered home. "We used to build 12 planes a month," he mutters to a colleague. "Now we're doing that before lunch." Even the Pacific air smells of progress, a blend of grease, fresh paint, and the ozone bite of test engines roaring to life at dawn. Across the nation, factories form a chain that stretches from California's shipyards to the engine plants of Ohio, to the aircraft factories of Texas and New York. The system has no precedent in human history. Trains loaded with finished aircraft roll straight to docks where cranes lift them onto Liberty ships bound for England or North Africa. In the night, the docks glow with sodium lamps as new bombers are lashed down beside crates of spare engines and parts. The ships depart, their hulls heavy with the weight of America's industrial promise. And while the Allies gain confidence, deep inside the Third Reich, the numbers begin to tell a quieter, more terrible story. Intelligence intercepts reveal that by late 1943, Germany, despite its own vast mobilization, can produce no more than 1,000 aircraft a month. The United States, over 8,000. By the end of 1944, that number will rise past 9,000 per month, a rate so incomprehensible to German officers that even those who trust their own intelligence reports doubt them. Back at Willow Run, a Liberator finally rolls toward the hangar doors, fresh paint gleaming, the propellers still in crates but ready. Workers gather along the sides of the line to watch. The bomber looks almost regal, its olive-drab skin reflecting the high windows. Someone starts clapping. Others join. For a moment, the applause is louder than the machinery itself. The plant supervisor turns to a visiting colonel and says with a grin, "We call this one Sunday's Child. She was built in a week." The colonel shakes his head half in disbelief. "You'll bury the Luftwaffe with airplanes," he murmurs. He's right. And thousands of miles away in occupied France, men like Oberstleutnant Hans Dietrich, watching American bombers multiply across the skies, will soon realize they are staring at the physical embodiment of that prophecy. The sky will become the front line of industry itself, and the sound of victory will not just be gunfire, but the clang of steel and the hiss of welders. May 1944. A captured Luftwaffe logistics officer, Hauptmann Ernst Kruger, sits in a makeshift interrogation room near Reading, England. The scent of cigarette smoke and damp wood fills the air. His uniform, though stripped of insignia, still carries the pressed neatness of habit. Across the table, an American intelligence major lays out a folder, not filled with questions, but photographs. Kruger eyes the images without expression at first. Endless aircraft hangars, rail lines lined with crates marked Pratt & Whitney, a skyline of cranes above the Detroit River. Then the photos change. Aerial shots, taken from reconnaissance over the U.S. heartland. From 30,000 feet, the factories themselves look like entire cities of metal. He blinks. One photograph shows hundreds of B-24 bombers arranged in a geometric grid outside a single plant. Another, a convoy of freight trains stretching to the horizon. The major taps the corner of the last image. "Willow Run," he says simply. "One bomber an hour. Day and night." Kruger leans back, the chair creaking. His jaw tightens. For a long time, he says nothing. When he finally speaks, it's in the soft cadence of disbelief. "Impossible," he murmurs in German. We build perhaps 80 in a month." The interpreter repeats it aloud, and the American officer's face doesn't change. "We build more than that every day." The silence afterward is heavier than any accusation. The ticking clock in the corner seems to mock the futility of the war effort that Kruger had once believed unbeatable. Elsewhere, deep in a British intelligence center outside London, more German officers face the same grim education. They are shown graphs and simple bar charts in blue and red. Each bar represents monthly aircraft production. The German line rises modestly, peaks, then flattens. The American bar shoots upward, a red wall towering into the margins of the page. The officers whisper among themselves. One colonel, whose nephew flies with JG-26, Schlageter, presses his thumb against the printout as if he might flatten it, make it smaller, make it less true. Another, Oberleutnant Vogel, mutters under his breath, No wonder the sky is never empty." The British major in charge of the session doesn't gloat. He's seen enough death to find no pleasure in victory. But as he closes the folder, he says quietly, "Gentlemen, your pilots aren't losing to men. They're losing to factories." That sentence lingers. Even when the lights come up, no one moves. Meanwhile, on the other side of the channel, the evidence of those factories fills the horizon. Allied bombers darken the sky so completely that farmers in northern France pause their work to stare upward, shielding their eyes from the glare of 1,000 glinting fuselages. The air trembles. Each engine note is slightly out of tune with the next, creating a rolling thunder that sounds less like flight and more like machinery at full tilt. At 27,000 feet, Oberleutnant Franz Schreiber of JG-2 Richthofen squints through his canopy. His Mi-109G rattles under the strain of altitude and frost. He counts, not one or two, but dozens, then hundreds of bombers. He stops counting when the number loses meaning. The escorting Mustangs weave above like silver sharks. He radios back to command, "Hunderts, 9,000, Himmel voller Feinde." Hundreds, no. Thousands. The sky is full of enemies. The ground controllers barely respond. What can they say? When Schreiber lands hours later, low on fuel and pale from the cold, he walks past the smoking ruin of the airfield's fuel depot, another casualty of the bomber's precision. He removes his gloves slowly, watching the black column rise into the gray evening. Behind him, his mechanic says softly, "Sir, how many do they have?" Schreiber looks at the horizon where the thunder of distant engines still echoes. "Enough," he says. "Enough to fly until there's nothing left to bomb." Inside a Berlin staff room later that summer, the topic reaches the high tables of the Reich Air Ministry. Reports from captured officers and frontline squadrons are read aloud in clipped tones. Charts, numbers, estimates, all grim. Speer's ministry is already pushing Germany to its breaking point. Factories running 24 hours. Slave labor dragged from camps to keep the lines alive. Yet for every bomber destroyed, 2 more appear. General der Flieger Karl Kohler, standing by the map wall, mutters, "We can no longer measure the enemy's production in aircraft, but in continents." A staff officer records the remark in the margin of his notes. Years later, historians will find it there underlined twice. Back in the prisoner camp in England, Hauptmann Krüger stares through the barred window at a sky slowly clearing of rain. Somewhere far beyond it, another formation of bombers is already taking off. He thinks of his homeland, of factories in ruins, of fuel depots burning, of pilots too young to shave climbing into planes that barely fly. He closes his eyes and exhales. "You can't fight an army that never runs out of airplanes," he whispers to himself. And outside, the faint hum of approaching engines answers him. August 1944, Omaha, Nebraska. The Union Pacific rail yards stretch across the horizon like veins of steel. Boxcars loaded with engines, wings, and propellers sit under the midday sun. Steam curls from the locomotives as if the whole network of tracks is breathing. Every 15 minutes, another freight train lurches forward, bound for the coasts. The sky smells of hot iron and coal smoke, the scent of industry in overdrive. At the edge of the yard, 2 young boys stand barefoot on the gravel, watching as flat cars rumble by. On one of them rests the silver hull of a brand-new P-47 Thunderbolt, its propeller wrapped in oilcloth. One boy turns to the other. "Looks like a shark," he says. His friend nods. "My pa says they're sending 1,000 of those to England this month. Neither of them knows it, but he's right." Inside the massive Douglas aircraft plant in Long Beach, California, production has taken on the rhythm of nature itself. Every workstation is a microcosm of movement. Sparks fly, paint guns hiss, drills whine. The noise is constant, almost soothing in its predictability. Rows of half-built C-47 transports hang from ceiling rigs like cocoons, each waiting for engines, wings, or instruments before becoming whole. A foreman named Jacob Rossi checks his clipboard. His sleeves rolled high, the grease already dried into his fingernails. "We're behind 2 hours, he mutters. Though behind means something different here. 2 hours on a project building over 400 aircraft a month. He passes a group of women fitting oxygen lines into a bomber's nose. Their chatter rises above the machinery. Talk of ration stamps, sweethearts overseas, and the new Glenn Miller record playing in the break room. For them, the work is not war. It's duty, and when the whistle blows at midnight and another shift takes over, the plant doesn't stop. It never does. Every hour, somewhere in America, a new aircraft is born. The scale defies imagination. The Grumman plant on Long Island produces F-6F Hellcats faster than the Navy can deploy them. In Kansas City, North American Aviation rolls Mustangs off the line with the ease of an auto plant. In Buffalo, Curtiss-Wright's assembly lines run double shifts to meet orders for P-40 Warhawks bound for China and North Africa. And then there's Boeing, Seattle, Wichita and Renton, a symphony of foundries, hangars and airstrips. The company's B-29 Superfortress, with its pressurized cabin and remote-controlled gun turrets, demands precision unheard of just years before. To keep up, Boeing standardizes every bolt, every rivet, every plate. A fuselage section built in Kansas fits perfectly with wings made in Washington and tail assemblies from Utah. This, more than anything, is America's secret weapon, standardization. While Germany still relies on hand-fitted craftsmanship, each aircraft slightly different, each requiring skilled machinists, the U.S. has turned war production into a science of repetition. It isn't just planes. For every bomber, There's a dozen fuel trucks, hundreds of replacement engines, thousands of tires, rubber from Louisiana, aluminum from Tennessee, steel from Pittsburgh. The country has transformed into a living organism, with arteries of railroads and highways pumping material to the coasts. At the Kaiser shipyards in Richmond, California, Liberty ships slide down the ways so quickly that one is launched every 4 days. Each ship carries aircraft in crates, engines in barrels, spare parts in wooden boxes marked AF property. When they reach England, the crates are unloaded by women of the WAF, who joke that America is sending over entire skies in pieces. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, German intelligence scrambles to keep up. Intercepted American logistics reports astonish them. Not the content, but the sheer volume. One intercepted document estimates that in 1943 alone, the United States produced over 86,000 aircraft. The Luftwaffe's total? Barely a fifth of that. General Alfred Jodl reportedly slams his fist on a table when he reads the figures. Then it's no longer war, he growls. It's arithmetic. He's right again. By now, the Allied bombing campaigns have crippled Germany's synthetic fuel plants. Every ton of steel used to repair flak towers is a ton not used for aircraft. Pilots are trained in weeks instead of months. Engines fail after a dozen sorties. And still every morning the hum returns, the low, distant thunder of thousands of engines heading east. In Detroit, a local radio broadcaster signs off his evening program with a familiar line. Remember, folks, somewhere tonight your work will take flight. It isn't hyperbole. The voice carries through factory loudspeakers, inspiring another round of weary, determined applause. A mechanic raises his wrench like a toast. Somewhere above the Pacific, a bomber crew banks toward the dawn, flying an aircraft that began as ore, then steel, then sweat, then sky. The American factory has become more than an industrial machine. It is a force of nature, relentless, deafening, and alive. And for every German officer staring at those impossible numbers, the truth is dawning fast. The war will not be lost on the battlefield. It will be lost on the assembly line. October 1944. Over the Ruhr Valley, Germany. The morning sky burns orange, not from sunrise but from fire. The distant boom of anti-aircraft guns rolls like distant thunder over the factories and smoldering rail yards. The air smells of cordite, oil, and smoke, a mixture that never truly fades anymore. Oberleutnant Franz Schreiber, the same pilot who once radioed, "The sky is full of enemies," now sits in the cockpit of a battered Focke-Wulf 190A, engine sputtering as he taxis along a runway pockmarked with bomb craters. The field crew waves him forward with rags soaked in fuel. There are no flares left. Above him, he can already hear it, the dull, rhythmic drone of another wave of Allied bombers. He squints upward. There they are. Silver dots at first, then glints, then a formation so vast it blots out the clouds. P-51 Mustangs circle like hawks above them, sunlight flashing off their wings. Schreiber feels his throat tighten. He's been flying since 1941, survived the Blitz of the East and fought over Dieppe and Normandy. But this is different. The sky itself seems industrialized. Every flight path, every squadron, every replacement feels pre-manufactured, predestined. He throttles up. The plane lurches forward, bouncing once before lifting free of the earth. He joins what's left of his staffel, 7 fighters, some flown by men barely out of training. Below, the airfield erupts as another bomb wave hits. The shockwave rattles his canopy. "Schreiber, this is command at intercept at altitude 23,000, crackles the radio. "Do not engage if outnumbered." He glances again at the bomber stream. 100-strong 4-engine behemoths shimmering in tight formation. "Outnumbered," he mutters, the word almost comical. Moments later, the first formation passes overhead. The sound is staggering. It isn't just volume, it's the rhythm. A steady, synchronized mechanical roar like a giant heartbeat. It's the sound of Willow Run, Boeing, Douglas, and North American, all merged into one iron hymn of war. Below him, the ground tells the same story. Ruhr's once mighty factories, Krupp steelworks, synthetic fuel plants, assembly yards, lie in ruins. Smoke columns rise like dying pillars of civilization. Train lines lie twisted, locomotives half buried in rubble. Fuel is rationed so tightly that fighter squadrons are sometimes ordered to not train at all. Every liter saved for defense. In a bunker outside Essen, General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland studies reconnaissance photos of Allied production centers. Endless rows of planes stretching across American soil. He throws the prints onto the table. "You can shoot down 1, 10, even 50, he says coldly to his adjutant. But when the enemy builds 1,000 more before breakfast, it no longer matters. His words echo those of other commanders, bitter, resigned. The Luftwaffe is running on fumes, both literal and human. Mechanics scavenge parts from wrecks. Pilots fly 3 missions a day. Every engagement now is uneven. For every German fighter that rises, a dozen American bombers advance, protected by squadrons of P-51s that seem to regenerate endlessly. December 1944. The Ardennes. The Battle of the Bulge rages. The Luftwaffe commits what remains of its strength in Operation Bodenplatte, a desperate strike against Allied airfields. At dawn, the fighters rise through freezing mist, engines coughing. For a brief, brutal moment, they succeed. Dozens of Allied aircraft burn on the ground. But by midday, the sky answers. Hundreds of American replacements roar overhead, freshly shipped from England. The German pilots return to find their own fields bombed in retaliation. Many do not return at all. By nightfall, the operation that was meant to cripple Allied air power has instead annihilated what remains of Germany's. In a field report dated January 1945, a weary German commander scrawls a single line: "We can no longer fly faster than they can build." Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the production lines keep moving as if untouched by the storm. In Seattle, another B-29 rolls out, nose gleaming under floodlights. Its serial number, 4265292, will soon be painted with a name chosen by its crew. Mechanics pose for a photograph, grinning, unaware that in a few months, one of their creations will carry the first atomic bomb. Back in Detroit, automobile assembly lines have been so fully converted that the term Detroit Arsenal has become literal. Chrysler builds tanks. Buick makes aircraft engines. Ford builds bombers. Every new machine that emerges carries with it a quiet message to the men still fighting in Europe and the Pacific. You are not alone, and you will not run out. For the Germans still holding the line, that message arrives as thunder. At night, when the air raid sirens fade and the fires are still burning, civilians peer upward at the contrails glowing faintly in moonlight. They stretch from horizon to horizon, intersecting like veins across the sky. A terrible kind of beauty, a geometry of defeat. In bunkers and barracks, captured officers recall the films they once saw in British camps, the factory reels of Willow Run and Boeing. At the time, they'd thought them exaggerated, propaganda perhaps. Now, as they watch the sky fill with American planes again and again, they understand those reels weren't exaggerations. They were warnings. War, they realize too late, is not just fought by soldiers. It's won by nations that can outbuild despair. April 1945, Germany is collapsing. The snow has melted into gray slush along the autobahns, and the skies, once the pride of the Luftwaffe, now belong entirely to the enemy. Allied aircraft roam overhead like sentinels. They no longer come in formation. They come in flocks, scattered yet unchallenged. The very sound of engines now carries a new meaning to those below. Inevitability. In a ruined courtyard outside Kassel, Oberstleutnant Hans Dietrich, the same man who months earlier watched those American factory reels in a British interrogation barn, trudges through the wreckage of what used to be a training airfield. The hangars are split open like rib cages, the concrete runways cratered and littered with twisted fuselages. A single Ju-88 bomber lies on its belly, engines stripped, nose collapsed. He steps over a charred wing panel and pauses to look skyward. The hum is faint at first, but it's there, the steady pulse of another wave of bombers heading east. It is no longer rage he feels, not even fear. It's recognition. The sound is the same one he heard on that projector reel, the heartbeat of American industry, echoing from across an ocean, at that same hour, thousands of miles away, on the floor of the Willow Run plant. The line has not stopped. The war in Europe is nearly over, but the machines keep rolling. Men and women in overalls still punch in, wipe their brows, and guide fresh bombers down the final rails toward sunlight. Some whisper that Japan is next. Others simply work in silence. One worker, a gray-haired woman named Eleanor Nash, stares at a newly completed B-24 and says quietly, "Maybe this one'll be the last." She knows it won't be. Not yet. But she says it anyway to make the thought feel real. Above her, a factory clock ticks toward midnight. In its steady rhythm lies the story of the entire war: consistency, momentum, inevitability. Across the Atlantic, captured German officers are gathered for final transfers. Among them is Dietrich. He's thinner now, his eyes hollow, but his posture remains soldierly. A young British lieutenant hands him a newspaper. Allies produce 300,000th aircraft. He reads the headline twice, then folds the paper neatly. The number means little in abstract, but he has seen what it looks like in the sky and what it sounds like in the dark. One of the younger German captains beside him shakes his head. 300,000, he whispers. How can a nation build that many? Dietrich answers softly, almost to himself. Because they built it before they fought. The captain frowns. Before? Dietrich nods. Factories, roads, workers. They were ready long before we were brave enough to believe the war would come. He looks toward the horizon, where another wave of aircraft drones overhead, American transports this time, carrying supplies to a Europe already half in ruins. The sky hums with their presence, a chorus of inevitability that no empire can silence. Berlin falls within weeks. The Reich's final squadrons burn their fuel on hopeless sorties, taking off from airstrips barely long enough to lift. For every German plane still flying, there are 50 Allied aircraft above it. The war that began with the scream of dive bombers ends with the hum of endless engines. When the fighting stops, American engineers walk through captured German plants and shake their heads at the sight. Precision craftsmanship, yes, but chaos in scale. Hand-assembled fuselages, non-interchangeable parts, scattered production sites. One officer remarks, "They built each plane like a masterpiece, while we built ours like machines." That, in the end, is the difference. The years that follow will turn the story into legend. Historians will write of generals, battles, and strategy. But for those who lived it, the mechanics, riveters, welders, and engineers, victory will always smell of hot oil and ozone, of coffee gone cold on a workbench, of the rhythmic clatter of rivet guns echoing in hangars that never slept. It was not merely courage that won the skies. It was persistence, the endless, unglamorous labor of a nation that transformed its factories into front lines. In 1946, at a post-war debriefing in Nuremberg, a British interrogator asks Dietrich one final question. When did you realize the war was lost? The German officer stares at the table for a moment before answering. When I saw the film, he says, the one with the American women building planes, I thought, if they can build faster than we can destroy, we have already lost. The interrogator nods quietly. There is nothing more to say. That night, as Dietrich is escorted from the hall, he glances once more at the sky through a barred window. The sound of an aircraft engine echoes faintly overhead, not a bomber this time, but a transport, flying supplies to rebuild the same continent that industry once destroyed. He closes his eyes and whispers in German, Der Himmel gehört jetzt den Maschinen. The sky belongs to the machines now.